This material is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends collection. This material was originally recorded on June the 14th, 1968. It is a speech given to the Oklahoma Boys State held at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma. The speech was delivered by Dr. Waldo J. Stevens. It was recorded by Mr. Raymond Fields. This material was copied on June the 7th, 1985 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
We're on the campus tonight of Oklahoma State University, where the American Legion Boys State is in session with some 800 boys, juniors in high school from throughout Oklahoma attending. Tonight we are to listen to Dr. Waldo Stevens in a talk on Americanism. Dr. Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, young gentlemen, it's worth a trip to this campus to see you men in action. I think this whole program has the wrong name. Boys State. I don't see anything boyish about any of it. If I had some way to harness just a small part of your energy and I could use it, I could live to be 300 years of age. It is a privilege for me to meet with you. And may I tell you at the outset, I haven't come here with my gray hair to give you advice. I don't have any lists of don't do this, man, and do this. In the introduction that you heard, reference was made to my travels abroad, my studies. Let me tell you very briefly why I took on this assignment. I was a very young man. I left school and went to war in France. I lived and served for 9 months in that part of the world, living in the trenches, wading in the mud, watching men killed. And when the fighting stopped on November 11th, 1918, I resolved that I would attempt to learn as much as I could about my world and try to understand, if possible, why civilized nations have to engage in war to resolve their differences. My recent trip to Vietnam was for a very, very specific purpose. I went in search of a glimpse of my nation's greatness. And I was told by a friend who asked me, "Why are you going out to that miserable place?" I said, "I'm going out to find out how young America faces the great realities of the day in which they're living." He said, "Do you think you're going to find it out there?" I said, "That's the place I will find it." "Well, why?" I said, "Because there is a place where the young lads of America, 18, 19, 20 years of age, are face to face with life's most serious issues and questions, challenged beyond anything that they ever experienced. And it's the way they respond that will determine the quality of their lives. I left America with a shout of those who preach morality ringing in my ears. The wrongness of what we're doing out in Southeast Asia. And the preachment of morality was offset by morale that is so low in this nation that it is alarming. I went to Vietnam, and after my conferences and started the tour of South Vietnam, down at the village and hamlet level where the young Americans are really doing their work. And this included the city of Hue near the demilitarized zone, back and forth across that country from the coastline to the highlands of Pleiku near the Cambodian border, on to Kanto down in the Delta. And I found among the young Americans the greatest morale, the finest spirit, the greatest determination, courage, dedication that I have ever witnessed in any part of the world or in this country. And it's a strange thing that men coming out of the society that say, get out of Southeast Asia. And the reply came back the other day from a young American lad, 18 years of age, writing a letter to his people and to the people of his community. You tell us to get out of South Vietnam. I want to ask you, why don't you get out of America? Nobody asked me Nobody told me to come to Vietnam. The government didn't call me to go. Back home, you're enjoying liberties and freedom. Out here, I have seen women and children with their bodies cut open, dead on the ground, by an enemy that will not give them the right to be free. And since our nation afforded you the freedom you enjoy, why shouldn't I be here to do something to help these poor people to know freedom? Now, you men are so full of fizz and enthusiasm, I don't get you stopped some way, you're going to take most of my time when I want to talk to you. Now, young gentlemen, let me tell you, I'm not glorifying war. I'm not giving you a rip-roaring speech on patriotism. I'm not telling you what you must believe. I'm not telling you what you must do. I care too much about those young lads whom I left in Vietnam. Men who came and talked with me and said, can you tell me why we're out here? It's right. What I'm doing is right. But I really don't understand what it's all about. And there are so many thousands of those lads who are convinced that it's right that after they serve 1 year, they volunteer to go back. And there are many, many young Americans in Vietnam who are now on their third term on a voluntary basis. They don't like war. They don't like the intense heat. They have only 2 seasons out there, mud and dust. And I want to say to you, I have never seen such quality in men as I saw in the young Americans in South Vietnam. And I hasten to say to you, gentlemen, you have it too, only you don't know it, because you've never been put to a test. And it's what I saw in Vietnam that gave me such profound confidence in the youth of America, such respect for their straightforward, honest, frank willingness to take it on the chin, that if the young men and women of your generation can get themselves straightened out in terms of an understanding of the direction in which the currents are running, you can do more to help lift this nation and to help put the world aright than you can possibly believe. And tonight I'm going to answer for you the question, why are young Americans called to serve in foreign countries? Why is our nation involved in so many places in the world? And if what I'm going to say to you sounds like a course in history, I want to assure you that I'm not trying to give you a lecture. Some of this is not new to you, but I want to bring it into focus for you. You happen, as young men, to be facing a world situation and a national condition that's totally new to the American people. You have no guidelines. All of this has come to you without a will, a testament, or a statement written out to say when you deal with this situation you do so and so. There's a lot you have to learn, and you have to do it by trial and error. And you're growing up in a society where the older people around you argue in terms of we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. And they argue that way because for 150 years this nation didn't have to do anything about its security. This nation was secure. We could go on and build our highways, our cities, our churches, our schools, our homes, engage in business, profession, whatever we may prefer. And the world was so far removed from us that this nation didn't have to appropriate any money. Men didn't have to be trained for military service in peacetime. And we went our own jolly way. Why was it that we could live 150 years in complete security and do nothing about it? Because the world environment was such that what other nations did and what other peoples did relieved us of the responsibility of having to safeguard our security. First of all, you had a number of great powers who were interested in themselves and their own interests. They didn't want a great war because a war would devastate their rights, would destroy their assets, their investments abroad. They made a desperate effort to keep a war from breaking out that would be a global war or that would cover a continent. And as long as the great powers prevented a war from breaking, there wasn't any risk that we would be involved. The second thing that you must see is that most of the Middle East, Africa, Asia, islands of the world were parts of empires. If a riot broke out, if a rebellion, a civil war, insurgency, the United States didn't have to do anything about it. The governments of Europe responsible for the empire under their jurisdiction did something about it. And we didn't have to send men. We didn't have to appropriate money. We didn't have to arm. And third, there was the British Navy. It policed the waters of the world. And the British Empire, on which the sun never set, called for the British fleet to maintain law and order on the waters of the world. We didn't have to do anything. And then the distance across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, the long, long miles that separated the United States from distant continents, made it impossible for a potential enemy to do us harm. You put these four things together and you find that the United States could live behind the waters of the world within the shores of this country, and nothing had to be done about it. How did we respond to it? In two ways that cost us nothing. One, don't become involved. Stay out of their quarrel. And this is the policy of isolation. Two, don't take sides. And you won't be involved. And this found expression in our policy of neutrality. Gentlemen, this lasted 150 years. This is the way the older people around you think today. Why, for all of those years, we didn't have to do anything. Why we're messed up in it now? Why do we have to call our young men? Why are we training young men in schools for certain professional services to be rendered in cooperation with peoples of the world who want to advance? And then the First and the Second World Wars broke. And the First World War brought great cracks in the structure of the world political and economic order. And there was a weakening of the political forces that kept the world going in terms of a peaceful relationship. And then it came to the Second World War, and it finished it off. Now what do you find? Your great powers are gone. Nations in Europe that once could maintain law and order in the Middle East, in Asia, in Africa, no longer could finance a military force. And it was said of one of the strutting leaders of Europe at the end of the Second World War, and it was true of more than this leader, he had a champagne taste when he didn't have the price of a beer. The great power system vanished. What happened to the empires? They split. They were dismembered. New nations emerged. 65 of them. Small and big nations. Huge population. Hunger, illiteracy, disease, want, despair. No longer do you have a great European power that can send an expeditionary force when a riot would break out, and rebellion, and insurgency that could threaten stability to put it down. It's gone. The British fleet left the waters of the world because Great Britain could no longer underwrite it. And this took place. And this is one of the most significant facts for you to keep in mind. Where the oceans were wide and extensive, and the means of transportation by which an enemy might threaten the well-being of this nation was a great, great barrier, until modern airplanes, fast rockets, now supersonic planes coming. And do you know what happened? Modern transportation brought the continents of the world closer and closer and closer to the United States. Now you're only a few hours away. I stood at the airport in Saigon, watching the great silver cargo transports coming into land. And when one pulled up, stopped, and the crews deplaned, I talked with one of the men. I said, "Where did this flight originate?" He said, "New Jersey." "How long did it take you to fly from New Jersey with all of this tonnage?" He said, "We flew from the airport in New Jersey to Anchorage, Alaska, refueled, changed crews, flew from there to Japan, changed crews, refueled, and from Japan into Saigon." Saigon isn't 10,000 miles away. It's a matter of a few hours. And if you want to understand your country's position and your country's foreign policy, don't talk about whether it's a Republican or a Democrat or a mugwump or an independent or whatever name you want to give it. Think of the reality that the leadership of America faces, because when the great power system disappeared, when the empires were broken and new nations emerged that are insecure, underdeveloped, restless, the seedbed of insurgency and the source of war making. And there's no police power like the British fleet to keep order on the waters of the world. And distance now has been telescoped and reduced to a place that we're only a few minutes away from the launching of a missile, a rocket, and a few hours away from heavy bombers. Your nation's security is at stake. And what we had enjoyed for 150 years in the way of an environment that guarded our security is gone forever. Now what are you going to do? And in 1946, as the United States looked out upon a world that was topsy-turvy and ruined and wrecked, a prosperous nation, a productive, creative nation, a nation affording more people an opportunity for an education, medical service, opportunities for professional accomplishment than any people had ever known on earth. That nation's security was threatened. Now you're going to find new policies defined. You're going to see new guidelines developed. It has nothing to do with whether it's a Democratic administration or a Republican administration. It was in a Democratic administration that formulated part of the policy I'm going to list. It was Republican administration that completed the whole circle. And the first decision that the United States leaders made was that we couldn't go on alone. It had to be a collective group undertaking on the part of different nations. And the United States became a party to 73 different world undertakings and projects, along with many other nations, in an attempt to establish and maintain peace, in an attempt to relieve the tension and remove the underlying cause of insurgency. And the first decision was that of collective effort. And within the pattern of collective effort, the United States entered into bilateral mutual defense treaties. The United States will help safeguard the independence and the freedom of Japan. We will help protect the freedom of South Korea. We will defend Taiwan. And we entered into a bilateral mutual defense agreement with the Philippines. There was the three-power, the tripart agreement with Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, known as the ANZUS Treaty. There was the multi-partite or the multilateral agreement of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There was the Rio Treaty that guarded the nations of South America and the United States. There was the Southeast Asia Treaty that committed us in Southeast Asia and specifically obligated us to go to the rescue of South Vietnam in the event of communist aggression. And all this talk about our not being there legally. Men who want to be president of the United States, they're either dumb or they're deliberately walking away from a reality they don't want to face. And as a result, the United States was obligated. Now, what is it we're trying to get done in terms of the security of the United States? We will not see any enemy power conquer any one continent on this globe, because it is so close to the United States. It would give that enemy a great base from which to strike us. Therefore, we commit ourselves to defend the independence of small nations. And the United States has done something that no other great power in the history of mankind has ever done. We have committed ourselves to a policy of diversity. The great empires of the world were marked by a uniform, standardized system imposed upon peoples who did not want to live under the domination of a foreign power. The United States says we will recognize your right to be free, because in the recognition of the independence of different nations and in the upbuilding of the different nations, we're strengthening the base of many centers which will make it increasingly difficult for a great power to capture that continent. You're still dealing with the security of the United States. You may not like the policy, but the burden rests upon the critics to come up with a better plan. The second thing that the United States moved to do, and that was to arm in time of peace. Our heritage has been that of a nation living in peace behind the waters of the world, far removed from the scenes of controversy. If we had to go to war, we would mobilize, train, equip, move, fight the war, get it over with, come home, disarm, and go back to peacetime pursuit. This is our history. You're living in a nation in a time when, for the first of all this nation's history, we went into armament. Why? Because there were no great powers to guard and to hold the line while we could arm and come up to make ready to fight. But that wasn't the only reason. Modern technology and science and industry today now makes it possible for an enemy to strike the United States in only 20 minutes from the time of launching deadly weapons to destroy great centers of population of the United States. Only 20 minutes. So around the clock, you have men on duty, you have planes in the air on the alert to make sure that this nation is not taken by surprise. And for the rest of your life and the life of your children, this nation will remain armed until the world is ready to accept armed reduction, accommodation, cooperation, and recognize that this is not the way to settle the differences between nations. Gentlemen, these are the realities you're facing. And there was a third policy adopted. You can build all the military competence you wish, but you can't shoot poverty out of existence. You can't take your planes and drop bombs and eliminate ignorance and illiteracy. And you can't take long-range artillery and shoot disease out of a society. You have to get down at the source of the poverty, the ignorance, and the disease. And the third thing that the nation adopted was the policy of foreign aid. And foreign aid basically is a plan whereby we share with underdeveloped peoples and needy peoples of the world the know-how in the use of tools, the skills by which they can build a better life for themselves. Now, quarrel with the whole policy of collective security, quarrel with the armament, and condemn and criticize the foreign aid. Mistakes have been made in all of this. But you've had only 22 years where this nation has been forced to do something about its security over against 150 years where it didn't have to do anything. And our people are still thinking in terms of the 150 years and asking why we've got to do all of these things that I have enumerated without ever taking into consideration the revolutionary, radical change in our world environment that has imposed upon your generation a responsibility that no young people have ever had to accept. Now, you may not like it, but young men, I want to now quarrel with the whole policy of collective security, quarrel with the armament, and condemn and criticize the foreign aid. Mistakes have been made in all of this. But you've had only 22 years where this nation has been forced to do something about its security over against 150 years where it didn't have to do anything. And our people are still thinking in terms of the 150 years and asking why we've got to do all of these things that I have enumerated without ever taking into consideration the revolutionary, radical change in our world environment that has imposed upon your generation a responsibility that no young people have ever had to accept. Now, you may not like it, but young men, I want to tell you, you're going to have to adjust to it. And you're going to have to adjust your thinking to it. For it is one of the things that America has to live with, seeking to strengthen allies around it, faced with a condition that is jeopardizing the peace of mankind and the security of this country. Right now, when the revolt, the rebellion, the strife, the violence, threatening the very existence of France, when Great Britain troubled economically, Italy in the throes of a political conflict where communism is seeking to gain control, Soviet Russia moves East Germany into a position to violate the whole pattern of the rights of the Western nations in West Berlin. You say it's none of your business? Don't be surprised if you wake up in a few years and find yourselves in Europe. You're coming as young men to that place where somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, we need you, or you're going to walk up and say, I'm going to have a part in this, I'm ready to go. Now let me give you one or two suggestions that you think about. You think Asia is a long, long distance away. No, it isn't. It's a very, very short flight. Modern bombers, modern planes, rockets. You think Asia is old and ancient and steeped in the past? No, it isn't. 80% of the population of Asia, that is now over half the population of the world, is under 40 years of age. By 1975, from Karachi in Pakistan, around to Seoul in South Korea, leave out the 700 million Chinese and 100 million Japanese, you're going to have over 500 million young Asians between the ages of 6 and 21 years. They're young. They have the energy that you have. They're marching and they're shouting. Not in the kind of a program you have here. But they're determined that the ignorance and the illiteracy and the disease and the poverty and the hunger and the want which have cursed the people of Asia and other regions of the world will come to an end. How? They have to learn how to use tools. They have to learn how to use machines. They have to learn how to use fertilizer to increase the yield of their rice. And you never saw anything to equal what young Americans are doing, sharing a skill, a know-how with untold tens of thousands of people, humble folk, who are anxious to learn. When I was at Da Nang in the northern part of South Vietnam, they took me out to a forward camp where the young Americans, in behind barbed wire defenses, men on guard with guns, South Vietnamese troops joining them. And there I saw some of the most amazing things taking place that young Americans, 18, 19, 20 years of age, are doing this beyond belief. One young man, 19 years of age, who volunteered to go out from his regiment to this forward base to be helpful to people who have been denied the simplest things of life. Young gentlemen, could you believe a boy 19 years of age in the country in there had delivered 25 babies? I was there in December, and in November, he had delivered 9 babies. A doctor told me that the young Americans practicing medicine out there, they'd be locked up in the United States if they tried it here. You can't believe what these young Americans that are just a few steps ahead of you in years, they didn't expect to become involved in this. In 1954, there were less than 400,000 children in school in all Vietnam, north and south. And the Americans move in. And the Americans are going to start something. You just read about the war. You don't read about the great constructive, creative things that the Americans are doing. 1954, less than 400,000 children in all Vietnam in school. America went in 1965 in earnest. And by 1967, South Vietnam alone had more than 2 billion children in school. Lads like you, just a few years ahead of you, volunteering, going down to a village meeting and explaining through an interpreter how you can take the lumber and the cement and the nails and the tin for a roof and build a schoolhouse. And they have built them by the hundreds and hundreds across South Vietnam. Lads like you, finding a new meaning in life, helping the people to come up and know. And for the first time in 2,500 years, the children privileged to go to a school in Vietnam that Americans have helped to make possible. The Americans don't build a school. They merely show them how. Why don't they build them? Because if they build them, the Viet Cong will come in and destroy the school. But if the South Vietnamese build them, then they hesitate to tear down the school that they build because they'll alienate the goodwill of the South Vietnamese whom they want to win. The United States government had 17 million textbooks printed, written by South Vietnamese scholars, illustrated by South Vietnamese artists. Bright, interesting, challenging books to put in the hands of kiddies. Trained 30-some thousand teachers. Distributed 17 million textbooks. Over 2 million children. And by 1970, they're going to have 4 million children in school. Let me tell you another story. The average yield per hectare of rice, a hectare is just a fraction under 2 1/2 acres. The average yield for 2 1/2 acres of rice production is 1.8 ton, 1 8/10 tons per hectare. The great, great cry of ages is for food. The Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the United States Foreign Aid Appropriation established a research center in Manila, the International Rice Research Institute. They had another at Taipei in Taiwan, the island we call Formosa. They were experimenting with rice. They wanted to get a larger yield of rice. And when I was in South Vietnam, they had harvested, in many cases, their second crop. Out of these research centers where young Americans were engaged in one of the most challenging quests for the ways by which millions of people could be fed, nourished, given strong bodies. They developed a rice, and they flew that rice crop to Saigon, seeded the beds, transplanted the rice plants, and when they harvested the first crop, where they had been getting an average of 1 4/5 ton per hectare, they harvested in excess of 8 tons per hectare. And the Belgian agricultural expert, whom the French commissioned to draw up the agricultural program for the whole agricultural development of Vietnam when France went back at the end of the Second World War to reconquer the territory of Indochina. This Belgian expert said to a leader of American teams working in this field, "You Americans have hold of the greatest thing out here that any people have ever touched. In the delta of South Vietnam, where the great Mekong River comes down from the melting snows of the mountains of Tibet, spreads out across the vast territory of that region, and divides that one great body of water, divides to make 8 rivers, with water necessary for the cultivation of rice." This Belgian said to the American leader, "In this delta and in Cambodia, you can produce enough rice to feed Asia." You never saw men so on fire with a great mission, sharing with backward peoples of the world knowledge that had to do with health, agriculture, fertilizer, impounding and the use of water, and on through agriculture, education, public health, public works, public safety, public administration, industrial development, transportation, communication, hospitals, you name it. One day at my hotel in Saigon, a Korean officer came and asked for me. General Che, the Korean commander of 49,000 Korean troops who were fighting in South Vietnam on the side of the United States, asked if I would come to his headquarters. I went to see him. He speaks English fluently. And he told me this. I had expressed my great admiration for the Korean troops. Clean, orderly, courageous fighters. He said, these are the urchins, the orphans, the dirty, hungry, illiterate boys roaming the streets and the villages and the roads of South Korea in 1950, 51 and 52 when Americans came. And it was the Americans who, out of their limited pay, contributed tens and tens of thousands of dollars to open schools to educate these boys. And he said they're now in South Vietnam to pay their debt to the United States for the fight you put up to save our freedom. To fight communism because we really know what communism is. And to tell the people of South Vietnam that the Americans do not want your land, they do not want to control your government, they want you to learn, and they want you to be able to take care of yourself. I'm not talking theory. I'm talking about something that's only 2, 3, 4 years away from you. And you're either going to understand and realize that this is absolutely inevitable and play your part, or drift off to the extremes of the hippies and the new left and think they've got the answer to a world that has one hope, and that is to learn, to know, to discipline, and to come through. Now let me very briefly give you one additional insight, and then I will quit. I was concerned about to know why the morale of the American boys. I knew the morale of home was low. I knew youth at home was baffled and disturbed. I thought for a time that, well, it's only for 1 year. They go out and serve a year, and then they're home. That wasn't enough. I knew at the end of 6 months they had R&R, rest and recuperation. They could go away for a good time. I knew that no boy in Vietnam was more than 20 minutes away from a hospital and good medical service. I knew they were well fed. I knew they were well clothed and equipped, and I knew that they were extremely well led. But this wasn't enough. This still didn't account for their morale. And then I came upon this. And nobody has been able to give me a better explanation, so I give it to you. Like you young men, the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lads of American background, just like you, caught up in a whole conglomeration of artificial, exaggerated, distorted, phony wants. Want. across America, our whole society is caught in this snarl, in this tangle. Competitive, tense, a rivalry that unnerves many. And then I saw American boys taken out of this society, put down in Vietnam, in the face of the simplest, most humble, gentle, genteel people you ever saw. Where they had been in an artificial, superficial, phony atmosphere of want. And if they gained the want, they didn't want it any longer, they wanted something else. And put the American lads down to face simple, elemental, human needs. And now subject these simple folk to the cruelty of an enemy that has no regard for life or decency. And a young American said, "This is for me. I can't take this." You don't know what I'm talking about, because you haven't come face to face yet with a reality where you'll discover you have potential that you don't realize you have. You can hoop it up now to beat the band. But one day when you walk beside other young Americans, either on the soil of Vietnam or some other part of the world where this nation's well-being is involved and that of others, you may recall this night in this hall when a gray-haired man stood before you and said, "Lads, you've got something you don't realize you possess." And many, many was the boy in Vietnam who walked beside me, or we stood at twilight, and he said, "I'm not the same. I've changed. I don't know what it's done. I've suddenly grown up." The young men in your generation are smart. You young men have a capability that exceeds your own belief. Whatever you're going to do in the way of schooling, do it with a purpose and do it well. Master every skill that you can acquire. Build a sturdiness of mind and of heart and spirit that will help you to stand up and take it on the chin and not whimper and whine and alibi. And when you face the realities of the time in which you're living and the honesty of a nation that seeks to elevate the people around us because this is the greatest course for our own security, one day you will find your place, whether at home or abroad, in the great marching fellowship of a new generation that caught the glimpse of a different world from that of their parents, recognizing that their services were essential and their courage and their character absolutely important in helping to build understanding among peoples who crave the knowledge, the skill for their own development. And it's then that you will come to realize you belong to a nation that has greatness. Don't be misled by the front page stories of disaster and murder and burning. Don't be misled by all the stories of the uprising abroad. Why should you think that people are going to be cruel and want to resort to violence when there isn't a young man in this room that would favor cruel, vicious harm to another? You don't believe it. You're no sissy. You have tremendous power and you have a tremendous future. Walk into it without fear, but walk into it with understanding that you're coming up in a generation that's so far removed from what your elders ever had to think about, because they inherited their thinking from 150 years of a society that didn't have to do anything about its security. You belong to a generation that has to do something about it, and you're going to have to combine guts to stand and fight if that's what it takes, with a kindness and a compassion for other people to share what you are privileged to know in order that they could lift themselves closer to what you want to